Good evening, I'm Jay Aiyer.
And I'm Brandon Rottinghaus. Welcome to Houston Public Media's web series, Political Perspectives.
Tonight we'll continue the conversation from Red, White, and Blue on the U.S. Supreme Court cases. Let's get started. Brandon, we have some real changes on the court.
Yeah.
Supreme Court Justice, a titan of the conservative wing, Justice Antonin Scalia, tragically passed away. So we have now a 4-4 court, a tie court, right? No clear majority between the liberals and the conservatives. And the impact on that going forward, we've already seen some of it, but going forward could be really significant, right? Lots of interesting cases coming up, some dealing with immigration, some dealing with abortion rights, healthcare, the future of Obamacare. What do you see kind of moving forward? And how did we get to this position? Because didn't President Obama nominate someone?
I think I remember something about that, yeah. It's interesting, actually. A lot of these cases are Texas cases, so, you know, in principle, we should just sort of move the hearings to Austin or something, right? Be more convenient for everyone. Yeah, this is really interesting. We've got a lot of big cases that are up, and you've got an odd political mix, right, where you've got this 4-4 case that is difficult to be able to overcome. There haven't been many ties in the Supreme Court since the 1990s, right? We've had like 2 per term, and so this is a pretty rare event to have this happen, period. So the question is how to solve it. And as you say, Supreme Court justices have to be sort of jointly, you know, turned key with the president and with the Senate. So the problem is that the politics of this make it difficult. You're in an election year. There is a serious distrust among Republicans for President Obama, so whoever he chose was going to be seriously combated. So this is really an ongoing problem, and it's odd because usually it's the case that these things run pretty smoothly at the lower courts levels. Obviously for Supreme Court justices, things get more contentious, and we've seen that happen. But this is something that I think is going to be meaningful. So how do you think this is going to shake out? I mean, what kind of cases do you think are on the bill here? What kind of things are they going to have to deal with now? What kind of things are they going to kick until next term? How are they going to handle this with this tie, and what is the sort of impact of the loss of Justice Scalia?
Right. So with the 4-4 tie, right, I mean, you're anticipating everyone's sort of searching for a fifth vote because the way the system works, 4 votes, a tie vote essentially just affirms the lower court decision. So if regardless of sort of what the outcome was at the lower court, it just gets affirmed, but it has no what they call presidential value. So it doesn't carry over, it doesn't move forward. So the idea is, you know, really want to get that fifth vote. You've got a couple of interesting cases coming up. Here in Texas, one of the ones that has essentially been the zombie case. It's never gone away, and that's Fisher versus University of Texas at Austin. Abigail Fisher was a student at Clements High School in Sugar Land, Texas. She was not in the top 10% of her class. Under the state's automatic admissions process, she wasn't automatically in, but there's another method by which you can get into the University of Texas using a holistic method, and one of those factors in there was race. She sued, and originally the court had affirmed it and then sent it back down, and now it's back again for the Supreme Court, assuming, of course, that they were going to make a larger pronouncement about affirmative action. But now we have a situation where there's no fifth justice. In this case, we may not even have we don't even have an 8-member court. We have a 7-member court because Justice Kagan, who had worked on that previous case in her previous job as the Solicitor General, has to be recused from it. So you've got that one. You've also got another case out there, United States versus Texas, as it relates to immigration. President Obama had famously put out a set of executive orders, executive actions that had attempted to try to create some interim status or prevent deportation for individuals who were children of who were brought here as children who were illegally. They have a parent that's maybe a United States citizen or a child of a legal permanent resident. So these individuals were kind of in this limbo land, and he created this process by which they could stay here pending a final resolution. State of Texas again sued, and that has moved up. There's been an injunction in place that's been affirmed by the Fifth Circuit that says until President Obama is in office for the next few years, this is not going to take effect. And that the basis of that is the state's DPS system, right? The issuance of driver's license. So it's an interesting mix of cases. What ultimately happens is really unclear because we think it's going to be 4-4 and there's going to be this kind of this struggle. But the politics of it are interesting because, again, It's Texas. It's a conservative state, and it's almost like they're waiting and biding the time, hoping for a fifth vote. But now the specter of President Trump makes it a little bit less certain.
Yeah, the Republicans starting to rethink the stoppage of the nomination process, right? Maybe it's not such a bad thing after all, right?
Exactly.
Let me ask you this. So Scalia obviously was the most sort of conservative voice on the court, but also the sharpest articulator of that position. Do you think this is a case where we will find another conservative step up to grab that position? And or do you think that this is a time where you might see the kind of liberal wing of the court step up and start to articulate itself? Like you said, you've got cases like affirmative action, you've got executive power with respect to the immigration case, you've got cases about Obamacare and contraception issues, you've got the voting rights cases, right? The one person, one vote case, which they've already ruled on, or partially ruled on. So is this a moment where you see the politics of the court begin to separate itself and where you've got the two groups aligning themselves together? And does that hurt the chances for the next potential nominee? I mean, whether it's Garland or not, we don't know. But if it's somebody else, it may not matter, right? Because the two sides in the court have effectively kind of sharpened their own knives and have articulated those positions so clearly that it will damage any other nominee who might come. So how do you think that this all plays out without Scalia, with all the political cases that are here, and then sort of the nomination fight in the middle of all of this?
Well, I mean, Scalia was the conservative leader of the court. He was the national conservative thought leader, right? So you lose that. Justice Roberts is really the next person in line for that. Clarence Thomas, Justice Thomas was while a very conservative justice, was not that vocal, to be kind. I think what would happen is that who that fifth person is going to be critical. If it's a conservative nominee, more than likely this remains, for lack of a better word, a Roberts court, a Roberts-led court. You get your 5 votes. You may not just see him, you may see other justices retire. If it is a Merrick Garland, if Clinton wins and you see a Merrick Garland in there, effectively this becomes the beginning for forever, how long, of the Ginsburg court. Ruth Bader Ginsburg is the sort of the intellectual leader of the liberal wing of the court. She'll be the driver of the court, and then you'll see sort of a move. And so the question will be, if you get those 5, do you see changes in Citizens United, which have huge political implications, right? Do you see changes in the Heller case, which was the personal individual right to bear arms, right? Didn't happen until 2008. Most people aren't really fully aware or grasp that difficult issue. So those kinds of things could happen pretty dramatically, and you could see a big change. But let me ask you this: what happens? How do you see Republicans leading? So the politics of it are this: we've got this election process. The Republicans have said they've dug their heels in the sand and saying we're not going to confirm Merrick Garland. We're not even going to give him a hearing. Do you see that changing as the election cycle moves forward? If it looks like you could see a Clinton win, do you say Merrick Garland's about as good as we're going to get? Or do you say we'll take our chances, especially if it looks like you're going to get a Democratic Senate? What do you think?
Is half a loaf better than no loaf, right? If you're in the Senate, you think to yourself, well, we know Hillary Clinton sees the writing on the wall and she sees that this is going to be a problem going forward. And so she can nominate somebody who's going to be much more likely to support her view of things. I suspect that there's some truth to that. And I suspect, frankly, too, there'll be some softening amongst the Senate because they're going to get some pressure during the electoral process where they're going to think about how to save the sort of reputation of the Senate. And I think that partly one of the things is going to be resonant with people is that the process is unraveling. Here you've got nominee Trump, right, at the top of the ticket, talking about all these sort of things that are going to be changed to the system. And people are worried and anxious and don't trust. And so this creates this moment where it's difficult for people to have the stability that they desire. And then you throw on top of that senators who have to defend their position to say, well, we're just not going to execute this part of our job as senators. I think that creates a real political problem for them. So I suspect that we will see some softening of the position. At this point, both sides have hardened, right? They have their ideas and they've got to stick with it. So there's some rigidity there that's not going to be moved. But I think that you could get enough people in the Senate to be able to say that this is something we should do. I think that domino will begin to move in the direction of having some kind of a hearing. But I wonder, what do you think about this process of having this sort of split court? what's going to happen with the rest of these cases? I mean, we're talking about a situation where they're going to kick as many as possible. It strikes me, looking at some of the cases, that it's been a deference to the lower courts, which does sort of keep that regionality in terms of the politics alive. I'm thinking especially of the case from California, the Union case, which was a case where they individuals were still allowed to have to pay dues for the collective bargaining of the union, even if they didn't want to be part of the union. That's not something that like a conservative court would do. And so I wonder if it's the case that these justices are going to make decisions based upon the kind of legal specifics of the sort of lower courts. They're going to follow the tightest version possible of the legal interpretation, or are they following public opinion locally or nationally? How are they making these decisions, and why?
I think they're going to try to punt as many cases as possible. When you can't get 5-6 votes, 4-4 does you no good. And I think that you're going to see increasingly more. The issue is they take it, that they decide what they're going to bring up for a reason, and much earlier in the process. Obviously, they didn't anticipate it, and that created an issue. So I think at the end, they're going to punt as many as possible. So final question to you: if you were a betting man, do we see Justice Merrick Garland or not?
I think not at this point. The Senate is a pretty hard institution to get around once they've dug their heels in. So I don't think we're going to see much, but we'll see.
All right. Well, thank you for watching the program. Remember to log into HoustonPublicMedia.org/perspectives every Friday night at 8 p.m. following the 7:30 broadcast of Red, White, and Blue.
Thanks so much for watching. We'll see you again next week.